Welcome into another episode of Zion Media. I am here with Trevor the Key Keys, David the Lion Douglas, and Lance Weaver. Lance, Law of One. For those of you who don't know what the Law of One is, Lance is here to help guide us and instruct us as to what is the Law of One. Where does this book come from? What kind of work is it? You've heard Lance talk a lot about it in his videos as he says, well, the Law of One says this, or the Colburn says that. We're going to try to cover these, I call them apocryphal works, other writings, and how with using our standard works, we can better understand these writings, these books, these other maybe revelations. And so with that, and I will tell you this, my wife absolutely loves The Law of One. It's one of her favorite books. It has helped her love more. It has helped her understand when Jesus says, if you are not one, you are not mine. It's helped her understand becoming one in our relationship with each other. So with that, Lance, introduce our audience to The Law of One. I'd love to understand kind of how you came upon it, and what your thoughts are and its origin, and then maybe get into some of its teachings.
Yeah, and I think this came up because at Monte Alban, there was quite a few New Age people like doing their yoga and meditating, and so the Law of One is a foundational New Age text, and I almost have to like take off my, like, when it comes to Book of Mormon archaeology, I have a very scientific, because my background is as a scientist. Like I have very high scientific standards, but I have this other part of me that just loves speculative, New Age type stuff. And the reason why I like Law of One with, the other texts that are on my website, when I gathered in one site, I've got OASP, the Law of One, the Colburn. And I think out of all of the texts, and I read hundreds and hundreds of channeled and esoteric texts when I got off my mission, right? Just anything that kind of talked about the old world or the life after death. And I think why the Law of One and OASP in particular resonated with me is, even though they're speculative and who knows where they come from, they answer so many questions, and they give a really good pathway within, even they match pretty well with a lot of Mormon doctrine, but in a way that, like, you kind of have to change the way you think to universalize your faith, right? And that maybe is a concept a lot of people don't know about, but there's a guy named Fowler, who came up with Fowler's stages of faith. And if you haven't heard of that, you should check it out, right? It's this idea that we all kind of progress through these different stages of faith, and they somewhat match really what the scriptures teach about Israel and the gospel, like evolving through these stages of faith. And they tend to be like early in your faith journey, people tend to be very literal, right? Like everything is absolutely literal and kind of convoluted, and you don't really understand everything, but you are sure that every word in the scriptures is exactly literal. You know what I mean? So but that literal phase breaks down the more you delve into scripture, right? So the more that you start like seeing that the scriptures are teaching things that absolutely can't be literal, right? They're telling about, they're making a microcosm and a macrocosm and making everything into a metaphor, where you're like, oh, okay, well, if that's talking about, a broken heart, that can't be a literal broken heart. If that's talking about a flood, but then in another place it tells about the baptism of Israel through the Red Sea. Well, that's not a literal baptism. Anyway, the more, and then when you read Ecclesiastes and some of the Songs of Solomon, you're like, whoa, wait, is this God himself speaking? Ecclesiastes is almost like an anti-God book in some ways, except for that one verse. Like the whole thing is like, this is all meaningless. Everything in the world is meaning. The more you get into the scriptures, you more kind of have to be like, oh, this is totally changing the way that I see these prophetic words. You know what I mean? And you start to universalize the text, which means now, instead of everything being literal and pointed just toward me and kind of like in this egocentric, like self-centered type of religion, everything has to start being seen through a lens of like, well, if I apply the same logic to like a Muslim or to a Taoist or to a Hindu, is it still true? How can God be the God of Israel, but also be the God of the whole world? How does he fit in with these other religions? How does this fit in with scientific information? How does this fit in with, anyways? So that's the idea of universalization. And it's an important stage. Like there's like 5 stages in valor, stages of faith. And I feel like a lot of people who leave the church, basically they get stuck in one of the stages and they're not able to progress through to another one of the stages within Mormonism. Right? Because you're always going to be progressing. Like as you get older and learn more, your consciousness will raise and you will progress. But if you can't fit Mormonism within your progressing worldview, suddenly you can't stay there. Right? That is what the shelf is. It's like instead of you readapting the way that you see Mormonism, because there is no one Mormonism. Like everybody, I see Mormonism. My Mormonism is completely different than mine was when I was 16, or from my 16-year-old son, or from my 80-year-old grandparent. Everyone has a different version of their religion, whatever religion it is, right? And the idea is we all want to be able to walk up through those stages together. And I think that Mormonism gives a better system to do that than almost any religion, like especially in the temple. Like how much more could you have, like an idea that there are these different stages and you have to walk through the stages and everyone goes through them all before you come to the veil into the celestial kingdom. And
by the way, speaking of those stages, speaking of the temple, I went yesterday and I learned something new. Again, I learned something new. When it talks about living the law of consecration, we are in the stage of living in a terrestrial state. So we are in a telestial state right now. So we're only accepting that we will live the law of consecration once we level up to a terrestrial state. So we're not there yet. That's why we're not expected to live it, because we're still living in a telestial state.
right. And we should be there because the whole idea, right, is that we progress as far as we can individually.
Right.
But the church is only going to progress as it does. You
Right,
know,
right.
and it's still like in that boundary between telestial and terrestrial. And it's
Well,
simply
and you're spot on. And I feel like just by us saying, hey, we need an editor, and we have these people that say, hey, I'm willing to consecrate my time, that is living. So these people that are willing to edit and consecrate their time are choosing for themselves to live in a terrestrial state, even though this is a telestial world we're in. And so it's really, you're exactly right, Lance.
yeah. And like, so in the millennium, the world will become a terrestrial state, and the terrestrial kingdom gets to interact with heavenly beings. Like Christ will be able to come and go from heaven when the world is a terrestrial. And when church reaches that part, and when you reach that point, you get to interact with heaven. You start having dreams and visions, and then the world will at one point be celestial. But the big point here is that there are these stages, and they all lead from like this really low telestial sectarian, I have my belief and it's the most true, the only truth, and everyone else is false. And I don't even care about everyone else's beliefs. I'm not even going to think about them. It's just my version it's my way or the highway. And then we progress through all these states until we become one, until we literally mind meld with everybody else, and all of our beliefs and all of our minds and hearts are absolutely one, right, in the celestial kingdom. And my point is that these channeled texts, whether it be OASP or the Law of One, I mean, they do an amazing job of helping you, like, as long as you hold tight to the scriptures, the foundational scriptures, Book of Mormon, Doctrine and Covenants, and then you kind of just let these things challenge your beliefs. They force you to then search our scriptures and be like, oh, wow, okay, I have to look at that differently. And they did. There's just this expansion of your mind and consciousness that I wish that everybody would just kind of delve into these things a little bit, even though I don't believe everything in them, but let them challenge your beliefs, because they will change you.
When you say channeled work, I get so many people are like, channeled, oh no, like that's not good. And we don't realize that the first 5 books of Moses were essentially channeled.
Yeah, Doctrine and Covenants.
The Doctrine and Covenants is a channeled work. We're just using a different vernacular. What would be another name that we would use in our LDS vernacular? Revelation?
Revelatory. Yeah, a revelatory text.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you can call it a channeled work, or you could call it a revelatory text. We're saying the same thing using a different word. For us members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we use the term revelation. For the rest of the world, they use the word channeled. It means the same thing. So don't freak out when Lance says this is a channeled text. He's just using a term that is more widely used among the people of this world.
Hey, what was the entire Doctrine and Covenants?
Yeah, exactly what we just said. Like, yeah, that is a channeled or revelatory work.
And from what we understand from the Book of Abraham as well, now that we know that it wasn't a direct translation, or at least 95% of the people don't believe, including the church, that it was a direct translation. That was something that inspired Joseph to receive a channeled or revelatory book that's canonized for us. So it's like a scary word because it's like New Age, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and we should always take these other texts with a grain of salt, for sure, and there's parts of them that are great for sure. But
a lot of the channel stuff, and I think you'd agree with this, a lot of the channel stuff that I've read is like there's tons of truth in it, and then there's stuff, and it depends on the book too. You might get something that's like 90% amazing, and then there's some stuff in there being like, no, I'm not down with that, right? There's some stuff that's like 50-50, but to me, if I find something and I find 10% just gems, truth that's inside of that, and it's 90% fluff, right? And I don't agree with any of it. I've got the intellectual capacity to take that, set it aside, and to hold on to the good piece of it. And I love it for that.
Yeah. And that very concept. So we'll just go through a couple of the concepts in Law of One that I love because of what they're saying. And one of them is what we just said. Like it specifically says that when these higher groups, and it goes so specific about how higher groups work and how as you get higher in the groups, like they become more of these group consciousnesses. They call them social memory complexes, but they basically have they can all see each other's thoughts and minds. And it says that even in this world, if you can join a group, then at least in your sleep, like you can kind of join consciousnesses. So a lot of times when we like have something revealed to us in the spirit, it might be that we're just connected to everyone else in the church. You know what I mean?
So I got to tell you something, going back to the trip, and not to digress, but I don't know if you guys heard this story, but I ended up staying in the same like little apartment or condo with David Gutierrez on the trip. And I said, hey, we're going to travel tonight. He's like, what? I said, yeah, and we're in a new land. You and I are sleeping you're in this room, I'm in this room. But just know we're going to go travel tonight. We'll probably do some missionary work. He's like, what are you talking about? I said, just watch. Like literally, you and I are going to go share the gospel tonight. We're going to go exploring tonight. So go ahead, go to bed. And when you wake up in the morning, let me know what happened. He wakes up in the morning. He's like big eyes. He's like, dude, I don't know what's going on, but I literally dreamed you and I were doing missionary work here in this area, sharing the gospel. It was incredible. And yeah, so to go along with what Lance is talking about, that is a real thing, 100%. And I understand that I needed to be in Mexico, not just for my waking time, but also for my sleeping time.
That second night in Oaxaca, I dreamed that me and you went and visited a site.
No way.
Hold on.
Yeah. So anyways, it was fun traveling.
And I can't even count how many of my ideas come from dreams. And I just firmly believe, like, and this is a law of one concept, that like as you elevate your own consciousness, which all of the gospel principles are trying to get us to do that, like you connect with people and you connect with the group that you choose. And so that then you can work with the group in your sleep. Like you can get so much information and progress so much faster if you're part of that group, if you can truly meld your heart and mind, which is what it's all about, to be in tune with that spirit, with that vibration.
Which, imagine you can do that with your own spouse. Imagine if you and your spouse are, hey, it's bedtime. Oh, and I call it the 11:11 portal. I'm like, I got to be to sleep in bed by 10:33 so I can catch the bus at 11:11. So my wife and I try to catch the bus and see what we can go learn together. So it's an interesting idea anyways.
Yeah. Another concept that it says that I think is really interesting is the source that revelation comes from, right? And it has this thing where it basically says that any channel, which is kind of why they call it channeling, right? So any revelatory text, like the person who's receiving revelation, if their purity will dictate the purity of the work, right? So if you are, in fact, the way the law of one works is they had these three of them, and the youngest one was this lady named Carla Rupert, and she was only like 18 years old. And she's using in this text like crazy words, like words that an 18-year-old girl would never know, like superluminal velocities, right? And like, anyway, things that I didn't even know what they were. And I'm a full-on scientist, and I'm having to read like, oh, that's close to this. It's like asymptotic travel close to the speed of light. Anyway, so she gets picked as a channel because they try the other dudes, and the other dudes are like, one of them's a professor. He's brilliant. And you just naturally think, well, he should be the best channel. And if it's fake, he's the one who should be talking because he would know all this stuff, but she wouldn't know squat. But they pick her because she doesn't know anything and she's able to channel the information without putting her own spin and opinions into it.
She has no blocks.
Right. And that like rings so true to me that when it comes to revelation, like a true prophet is somebody who is able to connect and grab stuff without diluting it or polluting it. But that so many of these works, like the Law of One, like it even says in there, like that you guys sometimes pollute these works. Like I can't remember how it phrases it.
Because of bias, right?
Exactly.
Our bias can pollute those works.
Right. And so someone like Joseph Smith, like he is a very pure channel, just getting amazing stuff from very high levels. Whereas it's talking about how it's like there's all these different levels. Oh, Aspie goes into detail on this too. And a lot of times you're just reaching up like one level and you're just learning things from spirits who are just a little bit smarter than you. And it's like, well, why would you want to take advice from that? Like you need to find prophets who are able to connect to very high beings, right? If not people from the celestial kingdom itself, because once you get to the celestial kingdom, everybody has one heart and mind. And so whatever they say is going to be the same. It doesn't matter who appears to you. They can come in the name of Jesus Christ and say, I am Jesus Christ, because they are literally one, right? But just like it says, I, the Father, and the Spirit, we are one.
That's a very deep thought if you picked up on what he just said right there.
Yeah. I mean, and a lot of times, like in the lower beings, and especially in the celestial world, like it's all about personality cults. Everybody has this ego and they're all vying for position and for like fame and favor. And it's all about my name. And even when it comes to like who's appearing to us, it's some are Elijah and some are Elias and some are.
Isn't that interesting? So once you get to the celestial realm, the ego goes away.
Yeah. Yeah. And it doesn't matter who appears to you. Like people are like, well, was it really Jesus or was it someone else? It's like, well, if they're on the same level, it doesn't matter who it was because they are all one. And they might come in the name of a certain title. But people in the celestial kingdom, they are one. They will give you the same message because their minds and hearts are absolutely connected.
Yeah. See how we did that? See how we did that right there? We said connected at the same time.
So we're on our way.
Doing a soda because they just jinx.
That's right. I do that so much with my wife. I mean, anyone who has a great marriage, has that same thing where it's like you're always finishing each other's sandwiches, or whatever.
I like that.
But
not sentences, sandwiches.
Right. I've got too many girls in my family. So anyway, the concept that the Law of One gives is it calls it a social memory complex. That as you get into these higher levels, like all the beings meld into a social memory complex. And so you want to connect with these way higher levels. But anyway, that's a really cool concept, I think.
Lance, how is a way we can detect maybe a false prophet is somebody that wants the glory and the fame for themselves, and they're putting themselves kind of on a pedestal. And is it kind of a hard, even there are people that probably are getting information and then their ego steps in and that's maybe why they fall. Could that potentially be what happened to, say, like King David? He let his ego get in and then he fell and then he spent the rest of his days writing things like Psalms.
Yeah. And so both Oaspi and the Law of One they just have so much powerful information in there. They have this concept, and the Law of One really hits home on this, that there is a system in place, somewhat like the Prime Directive in Star Trek. If anyone has watched Star Trek enough and knows
what is, I don't know Star Trek. I know this sign. That's about the extent of my Star Trek. But for us that don't know what the Prime Directive is, didn't you say you had like a video on this or no?
I do. Do we want to show a little bit of it?
Yeah, if you can pull it up, just because I never watched Star Trek. However, I have seen the Star Trek movies with Chris Pine, and I did find those really good, but I never watched the old school Star Treks.
I'm in the same boat. I do know what the Prime Directive is, but Star Trek was just too nerdy for me. But I loved the J.J. Abrams Star Wars, which is the Chris Pine. Like, that was rad.
Yeah, and we could get it from that one because that first scene where they like stop the volcano and save the society, but then they get censured when they get back to home base because they broke the prime directive, which is they cannot interfere with the self-determination of lower races, right? But they're like, well, we should save them, but the Star Trek's like, no, we don't interfere with these lower orders, right? And they can only interfere once that society like achieves once they can achieve warp speed in their technology, then they can travel between galaxies and affect their own self-determination. But until then, they are not to be touched. And the Law of One goes into like this crazy detail that there are all these different dimensions of beings, and that there are strict rules among the higher dimensions. And it's called the zoo hypothesis. There's Wikipedia articles on this. Because there's similar rules in place with us, right? In Brazil, there are uncontacted primitive groups that still live like they did thousands of years ago. And there are rules that you cannot get in and affect the self-determination of these uncontacted native tribes, right? And why
As
do we do
above,
that?
so below. Okay, I see it.
Exactly. And because it's logical. It's totally logical, whether it be in Star Trek or whether it be in Brazilian law. Like, this is a logical thing that you should not be toying with or affecting the self-determination of far lower beings. So anyway, let's watch this for 1 second and just listen to the debate, and then realize this exact same debate is carried into the Law of One, and it has amazing applications to the gospel.
So while Lance is pulling that up, I got a question, Trevor. Do you think that much of this, like whether it's Star Trek or Star Wars or these like movies, that like I literally last night was watching, don't judge me, Deadpool Wolverine, because they're talking about timelines and compressing them and doing all these things. So somebody told me, hey, you need to watch this. And be careful. There's language in there. Like my wife's like, why are you watching this? I'm like, I'm trying to watch it because I want to understand timelines and I don't care about these other jokes. But Trevor, do you think that these movies are trying to maybe teach us something?
Yeah, well, I think they for sure are trying to teach us, and it's like being weaved into like the zeitgeist, like preparing society, right? And I don't know if that's intentional. I don't know if that's like collective conscious that's like getting downloaded to these writers. But I mean, we've seen it happen all the way back to like the Wizard of Oz. From the time that we've got motion pictures, there's just like this weaving in of this lower, this deeper esoteric message. And I don't know where it comes from. I don't know how much of it is deliberate. I don't know if there's, writers that are pulling off into like a cigar filled room being like, okay, next we have to cover the timeline merge because in 2030, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know what's happening, but something's happening.
Yeah. So, and I feel like there's a code in almost everything, and it's trying to figure out the code. Imagine we're in this incredible game that we're playing right now, and this game is called Exaltation, and you've got to see through the code, which means sometimes you might have to watch a rated R movie. And I wish that I still had Clean Flicks that I could go to so I could get rid of the stuff that doesn't matter. But you got to be willing to, if you want to understand the code, you might have to be willing to follow the spirit of the law rather than the letter of the law in order to figure things out. So please don't judge me that I watched a rated R movie.
All right, we're gonna watch this. We've all watched a rated R movie, don't all the people out. Anyway, okay, let's watch this really quick. This is not rated R.
I have been saying this. God is all knowing, but he doesn't know everything. But what does that mean? It means he can see all the possible outcomes. But what makes it interesting, at least this is what I've heard from other scholarly people, what makes it interesting is we have our agency. So even though they can see all the potential outcomes, they don't know which of those outcomes we're going to choose. And they just dropped that doctrinal bomb probably in 1977 on Star Trek.
Yeah. And I mean, this is huge because the Law of One goes into all this detail, like that the majority of prayers that are from the telestial realm are answered by the terrestrial realm. right? And terrestrial prayers are answered by the celestial realm. So we're always praying to God, and we're always hoping that the God Almighty is going to answer us. But anyone who's been alive enough to see their siblings and their friends who thought for sure that God was talking to them, and maybe was getting information that like ended up being prophetic or predictive, but then in the end ended up being wrong, like realizes, I'm not sure who's always answering our prayers, but maybe it isn't always the omniscient God of the universe.
Well,
Maybe it's lower beings.
let me remind you that in the temple, when Adam begins to pray, you know who answers his prayer? Who comes to him first?
Yeah.
I think his name's Satan.
Yeah. And who is it who answers it after he is able to recognize Satan and say, get hence, I understand you are not a good being. You don't have my good things a chance. Who answers him? A chain of command. Right?
Chain of command.
A commander James higher than then tells the lower beings, and the law of one gets its exact details. Same with the WASP. WASP calls it a line of light, but it has to be passed down through the dimensions, right? And so who usually answers our prayers? It's like probably our ancestors. The majority of them are probably being answered by our ancestors. And I had this same experience where it's like I was praying and I'd get an answer and it's like, no, that's just a little bit more than what I know. That's not enough. I need somebody who knows more. And I almost felt like it's like I was getting passed off to higher beings, because then it started getting really original information. And OASP is this exact same idea. The guy talks about the same thing, how it's like he wasn't getting the light he needed to. And so it's like he kept going to higher and higher levels because he didn't believe what was being taught. He's like, this isn't good enough.
Real quick shout out to Mike Rigby for talking to us about Holy Ghostesses and serving in the office of the Holy Ghost, because that sounds pretty similar to that.
Yeah, it's like these are titles. We all know the Holy Ghost is the ruler of the lower realm, right? That Gentiles only can reach the Holy Ghost. But it says then Israel, people who are part of the terrestrial realm can actually be visited by Christ, right? And in the Book of Mormon, Christ is like I never visited the Gentiles. I only visit the house of Israel, right? And then it's the Father only visits even like the terrestrial people. Anyway, it's the same concept.
And that is the case in the temple. Like when Adam and Eve are in a terrestrial realm, they get visited by Elohim and Jehovah. But as soon as they go to a telestial realm, no longer does Elohim and Jehovah visit them. They are visited through a chain of command. Peter, James, and John then comes to them. So it is taught in the temple. Okay, go back to that Star Trek. You'll have to rewind a little bit, but I thought that was money, how they talked about that.
Let's do it. Let's play it a little bit. And then people can think in their mind, like just picture it, like our ancestors having this exact same discussion, and the church when they're trying to answer prayers, like, well, how much can we interfere in this person's life who's asking for this thing in their prayers? Let's stop there for now. So because this is kind of cool too. So the Law of One goes into more detail. It talks about all these different groups that are involved in Earth, right? And how it tells about the processes. It has this thing called the call. And there's like this mathematic formula, essentially, that makes it so that a certain number of people have to call with a certain amount of like fortitude before what it calls as quarantine can be dropped, right? So in order for higher groups to be able to interfere in lower groups, they have to be called. And the call has to have a certain strength. And it obeys the law of squares, like the same law that the gravitational constants, gravitational equations and electromagnetic equations are based on. So anyway, it's really wild. It weaves science in a crazy way that is so fascinating. But the idea that it's like, yeah, you have to be able to call, and then even then they're going to have to debate, like, do they interfere? And the big thing where it says it's to protect us. So it says that once they do interfere, they become karmically involved with the groups that they interfere with.
Yeah.
Now this is like a wild idea that you can interweave with the gospel, because we're all about being a covenant people. We covenant with God. And what is that covenant? Like, it is essentially that karmic involvement, right? They understand, these really high beings understand, like, okay, if you want to call and I'm going to answer you, we can do that. But you have to make a covenant with me, because we are now karmically involved in a way that we cannot escape. Like even these raw people, they said that they have to continue to come and try and fix the karmic distortions that they cause in Earth's timeline. So they're having to continually come back to Earth to try and fix the problems. And they said that when they were a younger race, they came in their naivety. They thought, oh, well, we can help, we can do this. And they were naive. And now they're having to fix all these problems that now, as they're more advanced and they see that the problems they caused, they have to fix them.
Hey, Lance, have you heard this phrase when we break down Israel is Isis, Ra, God Ra, Elohim? Have you heard much about this? But there's that Ra inside of Israel.
Yeah, I've looked that up so many times. Every single article you ever find on it is just going to say, that's coincidence, that's coincidence, that's coincidence. But I tell you, it's a crazy coincidence. I keep going back to it and being like, what are the chances? Is this Israel? I don't know. Maybe it's coincidence. Maybe it's not.
Well, when these beings become karmically involved, that makes a ton of sense. And then they start participating. And explain what, for a lot of people, maybe they've never even heard of the word karma. When you say karmically involved, this is again outside of our traditional vernacular as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Explain what you mean by karmically involved.
I really do believe in the concept of karma, which is as you sow, so shall you reap. Right? It's a spiritual principle.
That's doctrinal. Yes.
Yeah. And so there is a law of physics that if you drop something, gravity is going to affect it. Right? As you do things, you're going to reap the actions. But I like this idea that the more advanced you become, the more aware you become of your actions. And the more you realize that if you create a negative reaction, it affects you. Right? And the law of one, the reason why the law of one is called the law of one is because its very premise is that eventually all advanced beings have to realize that we are all one. Like we're all different faces of the same consciousness.
Just so you know, I didn't want to go to Mexico. Like one of my concerns about going to Mexico is becoming karmically involved. So if you watched how I tried to interact out there, I'm trying to interact to make sure that I don't create any negative karma out there with anybody, because I'm trying to navigate that place without becoming karmically involved.
Yeah. I mean, sensitive people, you feel it, right? Like if you get in a fight with somebody, there is an inner turmoil until you smooth that over, especially the more one with somebody you are, right? Like your wife and she's mad at you and you can feel it inside. Like that is karma. It's once you become connected to a certain degree, that's oh, well, any disharmony I create in them, I create in myself. I feel it in myself. And so I've got to fix it in them to fix it in me.
And this is what my wife has said to me, Shane, I'm you and you're me. I would never do this to myself. And when you start thinking that way, whether it's your spouse, whether it's your podcast hosts, whether it's your friends, when you start thinking that, hey, you're me and I'm you, so why would I ever treat you that way? And maybe what Jesus was saying when he's love your neighbor, he's saying, don't create this negative karma, because you're going to have to, as you sow, so shall you reap. And I take that to heart in every interaction that I have with every person, whether it's Ruby at the gas station or the TSA agent as I'm traveling. I'm really aware of this concept and trying to make sure that I don't create any negative karmic ripples. That I've already done plenty of those, right? I'm worried about the stuff that I've done previous in my life, and I'm trying to create as much good karma to counterbalance the negative karma that I created in my life. I'm hoping that prison was one of those things that I did that really, really ramped that up while I was in there to help those my friends that were in prison with me. But this is a really interesting concept. And it sounds like the law of one really dives deep into this.
Yeah. I mean, it has this weirdest language. You have to get through a serious language barrier to even get into it. But even its concept of God builds on the same idea, right? Because its concept of God, it calls it infinite intelligence, right? So in Mormonism, we get bagged on by all the other churches because our concept of God is really kind of wild. We have all these multiple gods. We can become gods, and gods are constantly moving up as we come and replace them, right? It's these crazy ideas, and they're new age ideas, essentially. And then you got D&C 132, where it's talking about the God of all other gods and the council of gods. So this idea in us that we have gods going all the way up this ladder until we reach some kind of a hierarchy that D&C 84 kind of talks about, a permeating spirit that is in all things, through all things. It's in the sun and the light of the sun and the power by which it was made, right? That is this infinite intelligence that the law of one, I think, talks about. And in that respect, we're actually a part of God, almost like our body is composed of millions of individual cells that have a type of consciousness in and of themselves, but might not realize that they're actually just part of a greater being. The highest God is basically an infinite intelligence that encompasses all sentient life in the universe. Like we're a part of that. We're a part of God. So when Christ comes to the Nephites and he's constantly over and over repeating, and the Father and the Spirit and the Son are one God. We are one God. Over and over, he's saying we are one. And in his intercessory prayer, Christ saying that these may be one with me as I am one with thee, that they might be fruit on the vine as I am one with it. It's all pushing toward this same idea. We are all one. We're all one.
What do people get worried when they talk about becoming one because they feel like they're going to lose their individuality? Explain so people can comprehend that you still have your individuality. It's just like you're still you and your wife's still her, but you're one. This is a concept that for people that are in the ego have a hard time letting go of because they don't want to, they feel like they're losing who they are somehow.
Yeah. And the law of one, and like I say, all this is speculation. This is the detail it gives. It gives us like progression. And it says that this telestial realm tends to last about like 75,000 years. They were kind of stuck in this cycle. But the next terrestrial realm, it says lasts like something like 1.2 million years. And then the next realm, I don't even think it gives a date on that. So it's like by the time you have been individualistic for 1.2 million years, like you're going to start melding more and more with other people, but it's not going to be faster than you want to. Like right now, become one as fast as you can. But don't worry too much if way down the line, like somehow did you lose your individuality when you got married? I mean, would you say I'm less of an individual? I think that it'll be no different once you've like started to meld almost entirely with groups where you can see each other's thoughts 100%. And then down the line, maybe where you start to even think similar thoughts. It's like, well, I've been individualistic for millions of years. I'm kind of ready to do whatever's next in the stage of progression. And who knows what that is. It's kind of weird. That's just speculation, but who knows?
Cool. Okay. So any other, as we kind of wrap up here, I've skimmed through because my wife reads the Law of One. And I don't know why this was, but I had the book, and as I was getting ready to read it, the Spirit said, you're not ready, but your wife is. And I'm like, what? I'm not ready? Man, I'm an avid reader. I'm not ready, but I trusted the Spirit, and so I gave the book to my wife. And she's basically taught me out of the Law of One. And recently I felt like, okay, now I'm at a place where I'm now ready to read the Law of One. But even in talking to her, some of the words, like it's a hard text to read. So what advice do you have for people? And there's multiple series of the book. If you were giving advice to somebody that wanted to jump in and start reading or listening to the Law of One, where would you tell them to start? How would you tell them to manage the language barrier that's in there? And how would you advise, especially members of our church, to kind of study it? And how would you go about it if you were going to make this a part of your study? And how did you go about it?
I think that there's very few people who are going to get into this book. And I have kind of like an insatiable appetite for anything that has like a scientific cosmology in it. And like it has some pretty crazy science in it that I love, So if you're going to try and study it, first of all, I would just like go to my website, gatheredin.one, look up my text section and look at I've done kind of a blurb on it. And I give some of the language in there and how it translates, right? Like mind, spirit, body complex is just an individual. Teach, learn, cheat, teach. Why it gives everything in dualities.
David, Trevor, could you pull up his site real quick just so people know again how to get there? And we can kind of click through your site, Lance, and you can kind of show, because honestly, it's your site that literally I read To Go No More Out. I suggest everybody go to Lance's site, gatheredin.one. And he's done a masterful job at compiling this information so you can understand. And he's got all these different references that you can go to between all the different scriptures as you're studying this stuff. So I highly recommend you go to Lance's site. Lance, you don't even make money on this, right? Like it's not like I'm trying to pump your site up like, oh, go there, because Lance, like he does this because one, I think he felt obviously prompted, like he needed to do it. but two, I feel like he genuinely wants to help people increase or elevate their learning and vibration. So here's his site right here. Lance, kind of walk us through if I'm on your site. Hey, it looks like you've updated it too. It looks like you've got some things going on here. Have you been working on this?
Yeah, there's a couple little things. Hit that text, see right about after death, and then text. Click that, and then scroll down, and you'll see that there's one of them called. If people haven't read the Aquarian Gospel of Jesus Christ, man, start there. But go up an LDS, go up a little bit right there on the left, an LDS perspective on the Law of One material. And I say in there, like, I have a couple of these texts where I'm like, I'm not sure I would suggest that a lot of people delve into this. Like, if it calls you, read it and tread carefully. Like, pray and follow that spirit. One thing that the Law of One makes really clear is that when you do get into esoteric knowledge, where that you are connected kind of with higher beings and they're going to come teach you, there's part of this prime directive, part of this higher law says that if a group from these, it calls a service to self or service to other side, right? The good versus the bad, the inward facing versus the outward facing higher beings. If you have one group come, the other group will always come too. And this is almost like a curse. It's the same with Joseph Smith, how he had the devil come when Christ came. Like anytime you have a good higher being experience, you are going to have an evil group come
100%.
and try and counteract it. Like that's part of the law written in the cosmos.
Lance, have you noticed, I know for me, I know Joseph Smith had the negative, then the positive. But for me, I've noticed I have the positive. Maybe I'm just a backwards human. I have a positive, and then the negative follows after that.
That's more common. And it says it's almost like a beacon of light, like that the dark side can see. When a light appears and flashes, it suddenly sees, and it says it comes to try to extinguish that light. Like it absolutely sees any kind of positive outward facing energy that happens in the earth, and it will come and try and counteract it. And so you need to have groups to be able to protect you from those bad influences if you're ever hope to create a good influences that persists. Because if you're solo and you are that light, like there are more powerful beings than you. You'll get conquered. There's no way, unless you are like absolutely calling on, and you have some higher angels that can help you. Like all this esoteric stuff, it's wild, and it's just going to sound crazy and kooky to people who aren't spiritually inclined. But once you get up to that kind of spiritual realm where you exist in the spiritual realm quite a bit, and you're having dreams and you're having visions and stuff like that, this stuff's real, and
Totally.
there will be that bad influence to come and try and bring you down.
Totally. Okay. So go back to his site there. So if somebody wants to get into the Law of One, they should read this article that you have, which is what I'm going to do. I'm gonna start my own study. I see you quote DNC 121 there. I love that it says in DNC 121, whether there be one God or many gods, they shall be known. It's talking about densities. This my wife's always talking about, oh yeah, this density, and I'm going like she's teaching me all this stuff on densities.
Translate that in your head to dimension. Basically, it breaks things into 7 densities or dimensions, and it preserves the word dimension for something else. But just realize when it's talking about space, time, and time-space, it's talking about the spirit world versus the physical world. When it's talking about densities, it's talking about kingdoms.
Yeah, okay. So when we're talking about dimensions, the way to break that down is degrees, right? So degrees of glory. So we can take densities, which means dimensions, which means degrees.
Yeah.
And so we're saying the same thing, just in a different way. So you have to be able to translate your LDS vernacular into this vernacular to just understand what they're saying, because they're saying the same thing, just using different English words.
Yeah. And then don't go bring this into Elders Quorum meeting or anything like that. But it will inform your LDS beliefs.
I love what you're doing here. You're talking about problems and contradictions because you're coming from an LDS background. And so you're also pointing out that just because you're reading the Law of One doesn't mean that 100% of what you're reading is absolutely true. And you're pointing out what you've found as some inconsistencies here. So you have to be able to detect and listen. I advise, if you're going to go down this path, go to the temple and start doing initiatories, because there's an amazing blessing that is giving in those initiatories where you can understand the difference between truth and error. And so as you read through this stuff, you need to be able to detect, and listen, this is true for the Nemenhah record. This is true for any of these. If you're going to read the Discourse of Abaddon, or if you're going to read the Law of One, if you're going to read the Colburn, if you're going to read the Owaspi, if you're going to read any of these, you need that power to detect between truth and error. If you're going to step into this, if you're not ready to step into this, I suggest stick with your Book of Mormon. If you're not totally ready, then just stick with the Book of Mormon. But if you feel like you're ready for more, if you've been praying and saying, I want more, there is more.
Yeah.
There is more.
Yeah, and go to that. Very great advice. Go to the temple, stay in the temple, and then ask, how does this fit with my beliefs? You know, and you'll get there eventually. And if the Spirit tells you, hey, drop that for a while, you've attracted some attentions from some bad folks. Just don't touch it for a while. Obey.
Totally. Okay, so go to his site if you want to study this. Lance, do you listen to it or do you read the text? Are you kind of a reader or a listener or both?
For this kind of stuff, I read. Yeah, but I kind of speed read, and then there's so many concepts that are so difficult. I guarantee if you first get in, I've been in this for like 20 years now, you're going to be, for the first 5 years, absolutely confused. You're going to make completely wrong assumptions. It's going to take some time to really work things out. So, drop some comments or something, to someone who's been in it for a while if you have questions and how it fits with our version of the gospel, with our foundational concepts, which we should all agree on and stick to.
Love it. Okay, we're going to go ahead and wrap up. We're hitting our hour and 30, and we have another important interview with somebody claiming to be the Davidic servant. We have another Davidic servant on the line. We're going to bring him on. We're going to figure out what kind of downloads this Davidic servant is getting. We're going to find out if his name is David. If his name's not David, I'm a little, I don't know here. I think his name's Tom, but we'll see. Maybe Tom's middle name is David or something. So we're going to dig in. We're going to find out who this guy is. So we're going to go ahead and jump off here. But Lance, thank you so much. Again, thanks for being our tour guide on that trip to Mexico. What a time. I will be reliving those memories for the rest of my mortal probation. It was so fun. For myself, I'm Shane Baldwin. Oh, and by the way, listen, I don't know what's happened. I don't know if we've been shadow banned, but for whatever reason, we have hit 11,000 and it just went. And I don't know if it was our live stream with Mitiga that did it, but we're trying to get back on God's algorithm. We want to get back on that algorithm. So make sure if you like this video, share it, like it, post in the comments about it, do all of those things because it helps push these videos out. And I feel like this information, especially the information that was in this video, is very, very important to all of our progression and ascension. So for myself, I'm Shane Baldwin. For Trevor the Keys, David the Lion Douglas, and Lance Weaver, thank you for tuning in, and we will see you guys all next time.
Come together, searching for the way, guided by the Spirit, shining every day. Voices call from Zion, beckoning the pure, gathering the faithful where the truth is sure. Follow the Spirit, follow the light, follow the truth. Don't lose your way, don't lose your way. Follow the Spirit, follow the light, follow the light, follow the truth. It shines today. Gather all the nations, call them to the fold, where Zion's truth and glory brighter than the gold. Seeking for the answers for what we never knew, finding in the Spirit all things pure and true. Follow the Spirit, follow the light, follow the truth. Don't lose your way, don't lose your Spirit. Follow the light, follow the truth. It shines today. Follow the truth. Searching for the answers, for what we never knew. Finding in the spirit all things cold and true.